All right, everybody. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining. My name is Ben Clapper, Executive Director of Louisiana Rights Life. I'm going to just be your MC today. And what we're going to do is we're going to run through a few different speakers, and then we're going to take questions at the end. You should be able to raise your hand on the function on the Zoom app, or if you're on the phone, I believe you have to hit *9. I'm sorry, we're trying to make sure we knew that. So if you're on the phone, we believe it's *9, but on Zoom users, you can raise your hand on there, and then we're going to get to questions in order as they come in. We're going to do the best we can in the time that we have today, and we hope it works well, and thank you all for your attention. First today, what we're going to do is we're going to send it over to the state capitol to State Senator Katrina Jackson, who is the author of the 2014 Unsafe Abortion Protection Act, that was on the issue in this Supreme Court case today. Senator Jackson.
Hey, how's it going, Ben and everyone else?
Senator Jackson, Senator, 1 second. Let us make sure that we get you spotlighted on the video so that people can see. Okay, there we go.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Good. Listen, even today, I'll choose to still rejoice in the fact that we are still able to fight, that we're still able to stand for women. Of course, this is a decision that I holistically do not agree with. It's a very disappointing decision. I am in the state capitol, and we're on the floor right now, but I had to step away and just speak with everyone about it. It has been something today that has almost taken my breath away. That in America, at a time when we have advocated for access to health care, when we have tried to ensure that people are qualified, that in the one area where women truly need qualified physicians, that the Supreme Court ruled against it. As you know, in Louisiana, radiologists and optometrists have performed abortions. We've heard of a number of horror stories. As this bill got out and circulated for years, there were a number of women, even those who were pro-choice, who said, Katrina, I don't agree with your stance on life, but what I do agree with is that I think that every woman who walks into an abortion clinic believes that she's walking into the hands of an OBGYN. And she's walking into the hands of someone that if there's trouble or complications during that procedure, that physician will be able to provide a continuity of care and contact the hospital on her behalf if she begins to hemorrhage or anything begins to happen. So the one good thing I say in this is that at least we've made women in Louisiana and all over the country realize that when they're walking into abortion facilities, they're not all the time, and most of the time they're not walking in with qualified physicians who can follow the care if something happens. And that's really big for me. Now, I am holistically disappointed in the decision of the Supreme Court that in Louisiana, when a man chooses to go to a outpatient surgical center, ambulatory surgical center, and have a vasectomy, that physician is required to have admitting privileges. But when a woman makes the unfortunate choice of abortion, she's walking into the hands of a physician that's probably not qualified, but definitely only one physician in Louisiana can follow the continuity of care and contact the hospital if something goes wrong. And that one decision, from some women who have complications, for most in Louisiana, lead to a lifetime of complications and unable to ever get pregnant again. And so that's what the Supreme Court ruled on today. A lot of people think that the Supreme Court ruled on whether abortion was legal. No. They ruled against women's health care. They ruled against qualified physicians being required. And so with that, I am just deeply saddened, and that's where I am. And I have to be as real as I can be. I cannot placate it. I cannot act like this was just a law we put in place. This was for our citizens. This was to protect women. And that didn't happen. And a Supreme Court, one man who's not elected, decided that we can't protect women in our state. And that for me is a blow to all women, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life. They dealt a blow to women's health care today, and a standard that should be set, and that our health care standards should be the same as those of men in this state and around the country. And so that's where I am, and just extremely disappointed. We'll stay on as long as I can, but of course we're on the floor. So thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate your time. Next, we're going to have the Associate Director of Louisiana Right to Life and attorney on staff, Angie Thomas, to give her reaction to the Supreme Court case.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Katrina. We are extremely disappointed that the Supreme Court has continued its abortion distortion, that laws can apply to everyone except for the abortion industry. We're also very disappointed that the Supreme Court really didn't even take on the standing issue. It was hardly considered. Again, the legislative process and the will of this state was usurped by 5 judges. It was overwhelmingly passed. It was authored by women. It was written by women. It was the will of this state. And yet the Supreme Court, a few people come in and strike it down. We are hopeful, however, because Roberts and his concurrence did explain that we're going to go back to the undue burden test presented in Casey, as opposed to the very difficult balancing test that Whole Woman's Health put forth. And what this means to us is that we can continue to fight for incremental legislation that will help women and will help unborn children. And we will never stop fighting for that. We're also very hopeful by the words written by Justice Thomas. He clearly stated that Roe is illegitimate law. We're also very, very thankful that Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are with us on this. And I think Justice Alito said it so great when he said, in both Whole Women's Health and in today's case, the abortion right is used like a bulldozer to flatten legal law rules that stand in the way. And this is what we have seen happen time and time again. So we at Louisiana Right to Life will never stop working to support women in unplanned pregnancies with real support so that they don't have to make the decision of abortion.
Thank you, Angie. And you know, on behalf of Louisiana Right to Life, we also want to thank Attorney General Jeff Landry and Solicitor General Liz Murrell on their thorough, competent, and dedicated defense of this law that was passed in 2014. We really appreciate their excellent work. Now we'd like to bring in Cindy Collins, who is the director of the Crisis Pregnancy Center in Slidell and also Abortion Recovery Network in Louisiana. Cindy was someone who testified at the state legislature in favor of this legislation, and I believe that her name is mentioned in one of the dissents, though, Cindy, you may have to correct me on that. It's been a fast morning, but thank you, Cindy, for joining us.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Angie, and thank you, Senator Jackson, for your heart and for bringing this forward. You know, this is what you're seeing is my heart right now. I did testify in the legislature in 2014, and part of my testimony was referred to by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals as a woman who has had an abortion. And as I shared even before the court, that the abortionist told me to get up, get out, and to keep quiet, to shut up during the abortion procedure, and then afterward. And I went outside on the bloody ground with my blood and the blood of my child. And, you know, that's been many years ago, but I have counseled hundreds of women now, and if not thousands that have had abortions, many of those from Louisiana, and nothing's changed. I mean, just this past year, I counseled a young woman that went to the same place, Hope Medical Clinic in Shreveport, and she said that she was told, now y'all best not move when you go in there. I don't want no accidents. I don't want to hear no screaming or crying. Stay still and do what they say. The memories from that day are clear as ever, and I am disturbed daily and woken up by them almost nightly. And those are the voices that you're not hearing, are the voices of Louisiana women that were crying out for justice. by what Senator Jackson brought forward and what we all went forward. This was for Louisiana women. And that's what I'm crying out for. Where's the justice for Louisiana women? You know, the abortionist in that particular abortion business, there was an ophthalmologist and a radiologist that were doing abortions. I encourage the media and the press to tell the truth about what is happening to Louisiana women. Look at the stories, voices like mine that have been silenced by the abortion industry, and then they've been silenced by the media also. You know, there's many stories out there, and that's what Senator Jackson was trying to do, was to allow the truth to be heard, our stories to be heard, and also to provide a place of healing in Louisiana. That's what Louisiana abortion recovery is about, because there are thousands upon thousands of women I know in Louisiana that are still hurting from the pain of abortion. So, you know, we're not going away. We'll still be here for any woman that is listening. LAHope.net is the website, or contact Louisiana Right to Life. That's allowed our voices to come in. And thank you, Senator Jackson. Never give up. We're very thankful that you're a voice for women. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Cindy. We appreciate your words and for your courage and your strength. Next, we're going to have Dorinda Board Lee with the Bioethics Defense Fund. Dorinda was one of the leading attorneys that consulted with Senator Jackson to write this law and then to have it be introduced in the Louisiana legislature. Dorinda.
Hello, my name is Dorinda Board Lee. I'm an attorney with Bioethics Defense Fund. Thank you for being here today. As I've briefly reviewed this opinion, I can just say the obvious, that once again, we are seeing the United States Supreme Court, 5 unelected justices, substitute their policy preferences for the will of the people. In this case, a pro-life Democrat who is a woman, who is wanting to do the normal thing that a state legislature does, which is to protect the health and well-being of its citizens. This is about protecting women's health, plain and simple. Everyone knows that. That's what democracy does. And the Supreme Court has yet again, with Justice Roberts joining the majority, said that no, this is 5 unelected judges, a federal court judge, using their policy preferences. So what did they do? Well, Justice Roberts went and used the principle of stare decisis. He said, 4 years ago, we looked at another Texas case, and instead of looking at the distinguishing facts of how the abortion clinics in the state of Louisiana were under all kinds of health and safety violations that endanger women's health. We've just had recently a woman lose her uterus in a hysterectomy because of being botched in a Louisiana abortion clinic. Instead of looking at the facts, he just went along with, well, we've said this before with a similar law, and instead of applying the facts, they went with that law. As Justice Thomas said, his dissent, the abortion jurisprudence of this Supreme Court remains in a state of utter entropy. That means utter chaos. It's not workable. And he pointed out that in this decision, you cannot find 5 people that agree on what the legal standard even is. There is no agreement on what the legal standard is for reviewing common sense, pro-woman, pro-life legislation that protects women's health and protects the lives of unborn children. So that is why Justice Thomas went on to say that it's an illegitimate role of the court to even have the abortion decision. Roe being reversed would mean that the issue goes back into the legislative process where the people decide. And that apparently now we do not have 5 votes for, because Roberts went with the judicial activists on the court. And so we would need at least 1 more person. The good news is that Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh recognize that pro-woman, pro-life legislation is for legislators like Senator Katrina Jackson and her colleagues to decide. So to repeat Justice Alito, he said the abortion right is used here as a bulldozer to flatten legal rules. the legal rules he's talking about, and Gorsuch said not just one legal rule, one rule after another was flattened under this sacred right of abortion. And they were talking about how third-party standing was not even addressed by the majority or largely ignored. And that means that an abortion industry doctor who stands to make money off the bodies of women and children, who has a conflict of interest in having the highest medical standards, can stand in the place of a woman when abortion doctors have no constitutional right of their own to have that kind of heightened scrutiny. And this was not even addressed by the court. It was argued beautifully by the Louisiana Attorney General's office, and hopefully that issue will come up again in some of the abortion litigation that is pending around the country. So I remain here willing and able to work with the great state of Louisiana and other states. Louisiana has led the way in showing the nation what it's like to pass pro-woman, pro-life legislation on a bipartisan basis. This law was supported by women and men, Republicans and Democrats, Black and white, across the board. It was like 95% of everyone agreed that women deserve better than to be butchered and then abandoned by their doctors. And that's what happened today. So it is a sad day for this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorinda. We're gonna have one more person and then we're gonna open it up for questions, so hold tight. Next is Elena Sagres, Director of Education for Louisiana Right to Life.
Hi. As a young woman, I am part of a generation that fights for equality and justice and nonviolence. But politics has divided us and blinded us to the disgusting reality behind the closed doors at abortion facilities, particularly in Louisiana. Right now, while abortion is legal, justice is not being upheld for every woman that walks into those doors. We as women will continue to be second-class citizens as the system falls through again and again for us. But I, as a young woman and a recent mother, and with this amazing group of human rights activists, will continue to fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, and Dorinda, if you can come up here, we're going to go ahead and open up the floor for questions from the press.
They need to raise their hand.
You're going to need to raise your hand on
Star
the
9 on your phone or on your
either *9 on your phone or on your app.
This is phone number beginning with 662. We're not quite sure the name of the person who it is, but phone number 662.
Yeah, this is Elizabeth Chris with Newsweek. I was curious if you could speak a little bit more to the third-party issue. I know that that was one of the challenges in this case, questioning the third-party standing. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that, please.
Yes, thank you for asking. So the court granted the state of Louisiana's request to review whether the industry, the abortion industry, even has standing. So that's a jurisdictional rule. It's a procedural rule. That means if they rule on that and they find that this third party, the abortion industry, can't speak for women who have an interest in the highest standard of care, then if they can't, just like I can't speak for Angie's interest, if she's harmed, I can't say, hey, I'm going to court to speak for Angie, because her interests need to be represented by her. And so this has been one of the abortion distortion laws from the beginning, is that the abortion industry has been standing in the place of women and speaking for women without oftentimes a woman complaining. What woman do you have here complaining? None. That we have the same standard of care, that if they're injured in a clinic, they get brought into the hospital by the doctor that was part of the injury. It might not have been a botch. There are known risks of abortion: punctured uterus, hemorrhage. There's all kinds of things we know happen. And if they know what happens, they can quickly treat it themselves instead of abandoning her to the emergency room, losing time. They don't know what happens. And then you have things like total hysterectomies or women losing their lives. And so because there's a conflict between a woman who wants highest standards of health and an abortion industry who says, well, we can't get it because we're not competent enough to be in these hospitals, and they're not accepting us, and that's why we're doing abortions. There's a conflict of interest, and that means that they shouldn't be able to speak for them. And so that procedural issue, third-party standing, means if the court said, Dorinda, you don't have standing to speak for Angie, then we don't get to even the merits of what Angie's complaints are. And so if the court would have said, as the 4 dissenters pointed out, you know, we need to first look at the jurisdictional issue. Is the right party speaking here? And they're not. What about that conflict? And unfortunately, the majority did not even address that on the merits. And so that, now there's technical reasons why they didn't, because it looks like at the lower courts, it wasn't raised vigorously to begin with. It was raised at the Supreme Court. And so that means that this issue of third-party standing is still alive. I believe there's a Mississippi case that has it teed up, and that may come to fruition in the future. But as of now, the abortion industry, even though it has a conflict of interest on women's health and safety regulations, is able to speak for women. And Justice Roberts, the only silver lining here is that Justice Roberts didn't agree with the reasoning of the court. He said he used stare decisis. And he said, well, 4 years ago, the similar Texas law applied, so we're going to apply it the same here. And he did reinstate the undue burden test instead of this almost impossible balancing test that Hellerstedt set out. So as you can see, this is a very complex legal decision. There are some things that are not so great, but the good news for the pro-life movement is that there seems to be that we can still work under the Casey undue burden standard, which has allowed us since 1992 to pass pro-women, pro-life protections such as ultrasound requirements and women's right to know, letting them know the risks of abortion, bans on partial birth abortion. All of these things are upheld under that standard. And so the more strict balancing test doesn't have a majority. So that's the good news of the day for the pro-life movement.
So you'll be hearing more about the standing issue in future cases.
Yes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now we're going to send it over to Rosemary Westwood, who is asking a question. Rosemary, you should be live.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. I just wanted to hear a bit about whether this was expected. I mean, I know no one loves to read the tea leaves, but the appointments of Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, and as you pointed out, they supported your side of this case, were anticipated to make a difference in this case. So were you hoping that that would be true and surprised by the Chief Justice's decision?
Well, I think first, it was just such a common sense law. It really was distinguished from Texas because all outpatient surgical centers are required to have admitting privileges. So this is just bringing abortion facilities up to that same standard. So we were very optimistic that the court would see that. So if you want to kind of comment on Roberts.
Yes, and yes, so if you're using, if you're thinking outside of the abortion distortion, it would seem like this is a common sense thing that we can all agree to. Having been involved with abortion litigation for over 25 years now, I'm not entirely surprised. And having watched Justice Roberts and his staunch adherence to the principles of the court, such as stare decisis, and his sometimes method of going with the liberal majority to try to salvage something. When we were in oral arguments, he did have a lot of questions that gave me pause. And so I'm not entirely surprised. I am very, very disappointed that Justice Roberts didn't simply say the undue burden standard is the test and we meet it. He could have done that. But if he's going to stick with stare decisis, he's obviously not a vote that would overrule Roe and send it back to the states. And so we stand once again, as we always have, one vote away. Is there any other questions?
I see 2 hands raised.
I think that's just still Rosemary and let's see. Yes, I think that's all the hands that are raised.
Okay.
Just finish it up. That's good. Everybody, well, thank you very much for your time today. If you missed a question or you did raise your hand, or if you'd like to just contact our office. You should have all the information on the press release. Actually, just look like we have one more question. So I think from Peter Finney. Peter, here in New Orleans, Claire and Harold.
Peter, you're on mute if you want to
Peter.
start.
Sorry about that.
They are.
What realistically are the pro-life options going forward? Are there some cases that we should be aware of that may change the landscape coming up?
So there are many, many cases in the pipeline, everything from bans on abortion at 15 weeks onward, bans on abortion of children identified to have Down syndrome, so that's prenatal discrimination. There's a plethora of cases, and what many people don't realize is that any case that deals with abortion in any way can be taken up by the court, and the court can say, this is a great question, and the question belongs with the people in their state legislatures. And that would mean Roe is reversed. It doesn't, reversing Roe does not mean abortion becomes illegal. It means that it goes back into the democratic process, which under our federalist system of government means that the people, through their elected representatives, decide what our policies will be, instead of 5 unelected justices second guessing us time and time again. And so, yes, all of that abortion litigation will continue. And so you're going to see more of the same.
And again, we are hopeful. The silver lining here is that we are back to that undue burden test, which still allows us to pass reasonable regulations for the safety and health of women and, of course, for unborn children. So we will always fight to do that.
And one of those ways, if I could add, that we can continue to do, unlike those on the court that would have us not be able to say anything about abortion, is that we can pass legislation through elected officials that helps women choose life. And that's what it comes down to. So laws like Louisiana has the adoption option, where the State Department of Health requires the abortion industry to give women considering abortion concrete, simple steps. What are the first steps that I can do to consider, instead of undergoing this trauma of abortion, what can I do if I'm not ready to parent, to perhaps choose a family that can raise this child? And how can we help facilitate that option, which saves women from the trauma of abortion? And that trauma is both, medical, psychological, spiritual. No woman wants to have an abortion. She just often doesn't know what her alternatives are. And so we're going to continue in law and policy to promote those life-affirming alternatives.
That's right, and help for women once they do have the children to really help them financially and with other support.
Parenting skills, healthcare assistance, right? There's all kinds of services that the pro-life movement through pregnancy resource centers provide. And so we will also continue, as we have in Louisiana and many other states, to provide state and federal funding to pregnancy resource centers so that women don't have to undergo the trauma of abortion and they can get concrete help. And also in encouraging men who are also in the picture in this, to step up and to be there for the women and children that they're responsible for. And so encouraging them and helping them with concrete resources like finding jobs or healthcare so that we can keep families together. Because a pro-life culture doesn't just support the baby, it supports the mom, the dad, the child, the family. And that's our ultimate goal.
That's right. The pro-life movement is really at its heart a movement of love, so this decision can't stop that.
That's right.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, we're going to make the recording of this press conference available online at our page about the Supreme Court. So if you need to use it and you're free to use it in newscasts or other things, we grant that permission. If you have other questions for us or any of our team, we can just contact our office. The information should be on our press release or on our website to get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to do further interviews on the subject. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.